Everyone, welcome to Boring to Badass, where we are talking to badass marketers who are taking what are traditionally boring brands and transforming them into badass brands. So today we have Gracie Padrón from Padrón and Company. And me and Gracie go back a few years. We knew each other, I think 4 or 5 years ago. We first met. At the time, Gracie was a freelancer, just solo person. And now she has an agency with a handful of employees. They're doing some awesome work. And, when I've seen her grow the brand, I really appreciate what she's done with making it stand out from traditional marketing agencies. And so that's why we have her on the show. So thanks for coming, Gracie.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Cool. Do you want to tell a little bit about who you are, a little bit about your background, and kind of how you got to where you are today?
Sure. It's my background is as a marketer and as a designer is directly tied to who I am as a person, which is I'm an immigrant. So my family and I came in 1996 from Cuba. And I was just a little kid. I didn't speak English. I had to learn all of that here. And then my parents, who both had college degrees, one as an engineer, one who ran what's effectively like a Wortham Center, a cultural center. And they got to the US and they had no degrees. It did not count. So they kind of had to start from scratch. And my mother ended up being the reason why I became a graphic designer, because she was able to find a job in a newspaper, a Spanish language newspaper in Little Havana, where she worked for over 10 years as their designer. And I fell in love with the idea of being able to communicate visually, rather than having to write an entire report. I could just do an infographic, right? So that was kind of my entryway drug at 13 into design in general, through the school newspaper. And back when we had I think it was Adobe CS2, was when I first got into design. And then I tried freelancing in Miami, where we were living for about 20 years. Did event photography, basic graphic design for local businesses while I was still a student. And then eventually got a full-time job doing data visualization and a lot of print design and branding for engineering firms. That was up until about 2015. My brother was living in Houston, and I applied to a bunch of places here. And I think I beat out over 200 applicants for a
Wow.
position with Houston Grand Opera. Yeah, there were tests. I think it lasted like a month before they
Gosh.
actually gave it to me. They called me at this time. Um, but I became the graphic designer for Houston Grand Opera, which going from engineering to opera is the greatest thing that ever happened to me. Like, oh my God, colors. This is great. um, but yeah, so I fell in love with the nonprofit world in general because it came with a lot of challenges. You had a limited budget. Timelines were always hard and heavy, and fast coming. And you had to deal with a lot of different departments, which was similar to Miami, but a more public scale. In Miami, if I didn't do a good job in branding, then maybe that business wasn't in a good position. If I didn't do a good job in a public facing um, uh, play or something like that, then the numbers could fall, and a lot of people would see how bad you did. So it really fueled my love for what I do, and helped me expand my knowledge more into marketing. And then a year and a half later, I started freelancing full time in 2016, and that's how Padrón Design Studio was born, which is now Padrón and Company, and we are now 9 employees. So
Awesome.
yeah, and fast, awesome and fast.
So how did you evolve the brand when you first started as, Padrón Design and moving it to Padrón and Company? Like what was some of that thought process as you started going from, essentially what is usually a personal brand when you're a freelancer to building a company brand? What was that process and thought process for you?
Difficult, personal, because when you're positioning yourself as an individual, first of all, we had a black and white brand for the longest time. And it wasn't because I was all bougie and fancy. It was literally because it was cheaper to print. So all my business cards are black and white. It was very, I'm like, if I can do black and white and get as many eyeballs on this as possible, then I can make it more about the work. And they don't need to know about me, and I can just rely on charm to sell from there. So it was my name. There were two versions of my logo, actually, which I don't talk about often. There was one with the accent mark over the O and one without the accent mark, because Houston is an oil and gas town, and it even though it's so diverse, I had been told that there was a possibility that having an accent in my name would make it, and really pivoting into my Hispanic background would actually make it harder to find a certain level of client. Now that was not good. That was not good advice, and I recognize that. That's why we had two versions of the logo. But probably about 2 years ago, we just exploded because of COVID. Believe it or not, when every other agency was really struggling, we blew up because I liked working with nonprofits. Nonprofits were traditionally very brick and mortar. They all had locations. They all had a skeleton staff that had just been cut in half. And they were up against grants pulling their funding if they didn't get help to enough people. So their entire business structure suddenly depended on them spending money in digital marketing to either get people to know that they exist, to give them money, or to be able to pivot their entire way of reaching individuals in need. So we onboarded over 20 clients in 1 year. We already had about 10. Yeah. And it was me and maybe one other person. And we onboarded 20 clients in 1 year. And by 2021, we had at least 4 people. And we've just been growing since then. But when we realized that people thought all we did was graphic design, that was when I realized this brand needed to grow. So it was in the name, it was Padrón Design Studio. It was me designing things. Or me telling people how to design things, which is also very fun. But we needed to be able to show that we did full marketing strategies, that we understood how fundraising worked. We understood how social media worked for nonprofits, which is its own beast. We got how grants worked, which not every agency did. So we kind of found our little niche. And in order to really cater to that niche, we needed to show that we could do anything they needed us to do, not just design.
Cool. So was that decision to target nonprofits, obviously you'd worked in that space, but was it a conscious decision to go down that road, or did it kind of come about organically as you grew?
I think a little bit of both. I had been in their place, the people that I was talking to, because obviously when you're dealing with a small business, you're usually talking to like the owner or a key player in operations or something like that. So you have more direct contact, and they fully understand that they cannot do anything that you do. So there is a certain level of absolute, like, what do you think? Give us the answer. Let's do this. With small businesses, and my nonprofits were more like, oh God, we have to do this right away. This donor just came with us. We have to make it the color of his Ferrari, or he won't donate $10,000. How can we do this? And I really understood their position, having been in-house. Even though not as long as they had, I really understood what they were going to, and I had a certain level of empathy and patience that I think they responded to. So even though we still take on small businesses, quite a few, I found that the thing that I liked about nonprofits was that they were constantly under fire and therefore constantly needed support. So even though I really connect with their missions. Obviously, I try never to take on a client that I don't align with their values. So nonprofits was an easy sell for me consciously, but knowing that they needed help on an ongoing basis also made them a really stable form of revenue. So rather than positioning ourselves like a big agency where, hey, you just got a grant for $20,000 or $100,000 to do a full rebrand and maybe a website. Give it to us once. We'll do all of that. We will give you the most beautiful website and the most beautiful brand. We're going to really do it right. But then we're never going to talk to you again. Don't come to us for a postcard. Don't come to us for social media graphics. Don't come to us for anything. We're just here for the big ticket items, and then off we go because we're a prestige agency, right? That's kind of the preconception I got from agencies when they were working with nonprofits. And if you're a large nonprofit, that's the way to go. Do that. You have an in-house team that can continue the branding.
Yeah.
If you're a small nonprofit, like most are, you don't. You have one poor person in the background, barely enough light in the corner. There's like water dripping out of a pipe, and they're just, I gotta get this content out, and those are our people, the ones that are probably doing a lot of good in a very local way, but don't have the support, didn't think they could get the support of an agency until us. And that's how we kind of positioned ourselves and why more kept coming to us. It's a very small community that all talks to each other, and they frequently jump from nonprofit to nonprofit. So employees referred us.
Nice. So how did you go about then updating the brand? So you talked about having just black and white just because it was economical. So at what point did you decide, okay, visually, this brand needs to be different than where it is today?
Well, I had a lot more designers on the team then. So it's not just me deciding like, I need this to be prettier. I did come up with the inspiration for the direction I wanted us to go in. I wanted us to not be sterile, right? I think sterile is the worst thing you can be as an agency. And I also didn't want us to be so confusing and cool that nobody really knew what we did. So I wanted us to find kind of a middle ground. And the thing about working with nonprofits and a lot of the small businesses that we deal with is we generally deal with women, believe it or not. The marketing teams in most of our nonprofits are run by women. So I said I didn't want a brand that felt very masculine and off-putting, but I also didn't want anything that was like hot pink, it's one that's not me, and I consider that a little bit insulting if you're trying to help starving children and then all of the branding for your agency is like hot pink unicorns flying throughout, even though I do call us unicorns. So I wanted something that felt soft but strong at the same time, that still kept there was a green color in my house that I accidentally picked the wrong color, and it suddenly became like our green. So we built an entire, I had extra, so I painted a wall in that green, and that became our green. So when we went to build out the color scheme, that was the signature green that we were going to put on everything. But yeah, that was the general ideas. We wanted to be strong and have an identity. So we weren't just cookie cutter template, but we didn't want what was in style at the time a few years back, like lots of gradients, lots of gigantic block typography, and or just the work being this massive thing. We weren't just selling the work anymore. We couldn't just show imagery of design anymore because that wasn't what we wanted people to know us for.
So plug your website real quick so people know where to go. Because like I said, I think you guys have an awesome looking website. And if someone's listening or watching, go to the website and see like what they're doing, because it's really polar opposite to a lot of agencies. Like Gracie said, it's very warm, there's a lot of textures, which I think is really cool. And it just looks very unique compared to other agencies. So what's the website, Gracie?
Padronco.com, Padronco.com. We tried to do .co and realized that a lot of places don't like it when you have a .co. It makes you put in a .com because it doesn't caught up with the times. USPS, yep. I'm talking to you. We went with a .com, and the main thing about the site is, God, it's got to load fast. Nowadays, that's just, everything else is just butter, but it's got to load fast, and you got to explain what you do in like 3 words. So that's kind of how that came to. But our website is a constantly evolving beast that I don't think people realize needs to happen with websites. You need to constantly pivoting, expanding your content, uploading new content, and not just writing blogs, but really creating, making your sales pitch a live site that people can walk through, even if they can't talk to you. So I like to think that some of these pages are worded in the way that I talk to people, which is same, comforting. I understand what you're going through. Let's help you get to the next step. So the whole website was built to be kind of like, let us hold your hand because you really need it. You really, really need it.
So how do you go about then, as you guys continue to evolve the website? What are you doing, and what is your kind of thought process on making sure it stays on brand as you make kind of that gradual evolution?
I mean, it helps that we were a design agency first. So we do have a very extensive documentation of our styling and our textures and all of that. That helps, right? Because we have what's called the integrated marketing plan, the IMP, that I developed. And it is large and convoluted and extends through multiple, probably years before we actually implement the whole thing. But it really, the idea that you have to spend 2 years coming up with a website or a brand or something before you go live, the idea that it has to be perfect before it goes live, I think is just foolish. So we have a multi-phase approach. So in the beginning, it was just, for the love of God, let them realize that we don't just do design. Like, just put it up there, make sure they know we don't just do design. And now that was the first kind of iteration that came out. It only had about 5 pages. And then since the marketing plan, we started focusing on our 2 core audiences, so nonprofits and small businesses, and they each have their own landing pages that we either direct traffic to or that you can easily find on the menu. And it explains some of the past work we've done, why we're uniquely positioned. Obviously, the nonprofit section gets the most love. As you become, with time, known for anything, that page is going to get you there. And we just kept to the branding and kept to the flow and really sectioned off content. So we didn't just type an essay and slap it on a website and throw a few examples on there, or write nothing and just throw a few examples on there. That's the worst. So we had a mix. We realized that people aren't going to read the paragraph, but there's a chance they might. So you have to have a page built for the skim, swim, dive crowd. So you need to assume that most people are just going to skim through your site, scroll through. And if there's enough interesting textures, elements, stats pulled out, examples, photos of our team was important just based off of the data of where people were going on our website, and they're going to our team page.
Yeah.
They want to know who we are before they call us. And 99% of the time they get me on the phone. So they want to know me and my backstory. So we wanted to make sure that that showed up as many places. If all they're seeing is that one page about that one service, they needed to see everything else that was on the site in a really condensed way. So that was kind of phase 2, is let's really cement our target audiences and make it as easy for them to feel like we can take care of them, which is hard because nonprofits are very varied in what they do and who they care for. It's not like, oh, I'm in medical, I have to make everything pictures of nurses and show a lot of manuals and things. I don't know what the medical industry does. I'm obviously not in that. Um, or
Me
oil
either.
and gas. Yeah, like oil and gas is so specific, and it felt like everybody was going after it. So we intentionally didn't show anything that remotely connected to the
Yeah.
audiences we didn't want, right? Because people specialized in them because that's where the big money was.
Mhm.
So uh, that was really, really important for these pages to be easy to navigate. And then if they wanted to dive, they could go into case studies for things they could explore. But
Mhm.
90% of the time, they don't.
Yeah.
They just stay on that one page, and that one page needs to explain who you are, what you do, and why you do it.
Very cool. So I want to swing back to one thing earlier when you were talking about when you updated the brand. You said, you had team members already. So how did you kind of build that collaborative
Mm.
environment where you guys worked together and built the brand together versus as opposed to saying, here's a brand I want to build, I need you to build it for me?
I have been extremely fortunate to have worked with some very, very talented folks throughout the years. And it is extremely difficult when your name is on it to give control over to anybody else. I think they've uh, part of working with me is they kind of have to, open their heads, and then I just pour a bunch of what I call my spiel about how I think we're helping the world with every nonprofit and all of this stuff. So I think they understood deeply to their core who we were and who we were trying to be. And that we weren't out there to necessarily make the big bucks. We were out there to make a change, help people, and not just help people out in the world, but help people who are employees who need a hand. So there was a lot of educating the team inherently from working with me and having to hear it every day of what our core mission is, right? We've started with our why.
Cool. Yeah.
And when you have a why, and when you have brand guidelines with clear colors, then you kind of open it up to, well, we know our fonts, we know our colors, we know what we've put out in the past. How do you expand upon this? And multiple people worked on it, where we, well, we liked how this poster came out. We liked how this element was used. We like this random agency out in Australia. Look at what they're doing. It's really weird. I dig it. Let's slap it in there. So I think collaboration was a part of it. That was just, um, but at the end of the day, I had to make sure that we were sticking to our why.
Mhm. Cool. So as you guys have helped other brands now with their branding, what are some of the most common kind of pitfalls you see with other people's branding?
Oh, I've helped other marketing agencies with their branding. You didn't know.
No, I didn't know that.
Oh, yes. Yes. In the beginning, I was white labeling for other agencies all the time. And then I told some of my clients, like, well, you could go with this agency, but you could just give it to me because I end up doing all the work for them anyway. Um, but I have actually branded other agencies. And I think the biggest issue is, does no one respect contrast? Like contrast is the greatest thing in the world. If you can't read it, not only is it not like accessible, it is you lose confidence in the brand.
Yeah.
So a lot of the time I ended up just shifting color schemes and adding certain things to make their branding seem stronger. Just like give it a little contrast, y'all. That's the number one thing. But yeah, with other, there was just this love of white space, which, don't get me wrong, I love white space. Everything has its place. But it just too much white, and then these light blue colors everywhere. Like they all started looking like each other. No
Yeah.
offense, I know Leader also
I
has
know.
blue.
Mine has blue as well.
Um, So you really, we actually did an entire study of every other agency in town of our
Wow.
size.
Hmm.
We took screenshots of their websites, of some of their branding, of some of their positioning, and you could really tell the ones that, like us, that were doing it for a cause because their branding was bold.
Hmm.
Um, Not to name names, but I'm sure they wouldn't mind. Like 5+8 has everything red.
Oh, wow.
It looks like a very, very strong Cards Against Humanity branding, right? Where it's like, we're going to give you a small line of text and a lot of,
Mhm.
reversed out text on color, and it's going to be red, and it's going to be in your face. And when I actually spoke with a lot of these agency folks, it's like, yeah, they didn't realize that they were kind of, or maybe they did. I mean, they're in branding themselves, but they kind of explained that, like, well, the clients we want should want to take bold action to
Mhm.
grow their brands, and their branding reflected that. And then for other brands, I know, like Minds, they pivoted. They're a lot like us in terms of clients. They don't know, they're all women owned, and they deal with a lot of smaller businesses and some nonprofits, and they have a very kind of 70s retro aesthetic that is also
Mhm.
interesting because like 70s retro turned modern, but very same thing, kind of warm, rounded, very much like we're an all-woman team and we frequently deal with women, so let's make sure it's not too flat and too linear. So you get a lot, you start seeing the personalities of the brands being reflected in the people, and it should really be a reflection of the person running the business, because usually if it's a small agency, they have a lot of say in where they want to go and what makes them happy.
Cool. So, for any listeners who are marketers and they're dealing with a boring brand, whether it's their own brand or they're at a business that has kind of a boring brand, do you have any advice or tips on ways to start the motion of making that brand go from boring to badass?
Sure. I mean, much like we did, do the research into what other brands you like. Um, but frankly, if you have two colors, you're in trouble. We're in the digital world nowadays. If you have two colors and one of them is white, you are in trouble. At least get a third. I think, like I said, contrast needs to be a really interesting thing. I think there was at some point this either trend or general concept of wanting things to be placid. It's kind of like I call it mental institution green for branding, right? Because they realized that there was this one color that you could paint all of the rooms in mental institutions, and it would calm people down, and it was cheap and accessible. And I think that's what people kind of felt they needed their brand to be.
Mhm.
Like, we need to be everything to everybody, and we're going to do that by being real chill and really consistent to such a point that there is no personality. Um, and if you're gigantic, right? If you are, I don't know, the Pennebakers of the world, or the Pentagrams of the world, even though they're actually pretty interesting themselves and how they brand themselves. But if you're trying to look bigger than you are, then that's what inevitably happens, because you have to cater to everybody.
Mhm.
So I think the strength of a smaller agency, or the strength of any small businesses, to pivot towards the weird and the interesting. Um, uh, you want to be Spirit Airlines of branding, right? Like, you're
Oh, yeah.
United, everything's going to be blue and it's going to
Yeah.
be real minimal. And then if you're like the Spirit or the Southwest of the world, it's like, throw some more yellow in there and make it weird. The Frontier, slap a wolf on the side of a plane. We're weird and we're quirky and we want you to remember us, and that's the best advice you can have, is don't be boring, because you can't fight the big guys, but you can stand apart from the other small guys.
Awesome. Great advice. So, to kind of wrap everything up, if people want to learn more about you or Padrón and Company, what's the website again, and how else do you want people to reach out to you?
Padronco.com, but we're all over social media. So look us up. But really, look inward. Don't look online. Look inward.
Perfect.
Start with your why.
Yes.
Simon Sinek style, you know?
Awesome. Well, thank you, Gracie, for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, and be cool, y'all.